I didn't plan to go there that day. I didn't pack an overnight bag or bring flowers. I didn't even call ahead to announce myself. I just drove. No music, no air conditioning, just the sound of the road and the question in my gut I could no longer ignore. I had dropped Mira off with them 2 nights earlier because Sabrina said she needed a break. And I understood that. Parenting isn't easy, especially when you're doing it half alone, even when the other parent is still technically there. But that morning I woke up with a pressure in my chest. Not quite panic, not quite rage. Just something wrong. And I've learned not to ignore that feeling. When I turned onto the cul-de-sac and saw their driveway half full, I parked out on the street. It wasn't out of habit. It was instinct. I needed distance, a breath of air between their kingdom and mine. As I walked up the walkway I'd poured concrete for 6 years ago, I couldn't help but notice the new wind chimes hanging on the porch. Cheap brass, clinking like bells at a mock funeral. The front door was slightly ajar. That was the first sign. Margot never left the door open. It was always about appearances with her. Always perfect, always locked. But today, that door was cracked like the lie they'd been living finally slipped. I didn't knock. I walked in, slow, quiet. Every step carried the weight of 1,000 compromises. I had paid for this house. Not just with money. With silence. With nods when I should have spoken. With patience when I should have pulled Mira away years ago. But I stayed. For family. For appearances. For Sabrina. I stayed because leaving felt like giving up on something I swore to protect. But that oath had grown brittle. And then I heard it. That voice. Margot's. Sharp. Unbending. Wash the dishes well, useless girl. I froze mid-step, the sound slamming into my chest like a thrown plate. There was no gentleness in her tone. No mistaking it as an offhand remark. That wasn't frustration. That was disdain. Pure and practiced. And then came the laughter, shrill, teenage, unbothered. Alyssa and Harper. Clarissa's twins. Sitting on that beige leather couch I had helped pick out. The one I'd had delivered the same week Mira was born. I walked forward, my shoes silent on the polished hardwood I'd paid to install. There, in the kitchen, stood my daughter. 6 years old. Barefoot. Wearing an oversized apron that dragged at her sides. Her tiny hands trembled as she gripped a sponge nearly the size of her fist. A tower of plates loomed above her on the counter. Her arms stretched high, trying to scrub with a kind of desperation I'd only ever seen in adults clinging to jobs they hated. She was trying to prove something. Trying to be good enough. Trying to earn her place. That's when I noticed. Her hair was still in the braid I did the night before she left. No one had even bothered to redo it. And her glasses, too big for her face, were slipping as she leaned forward. And the chip stool she stood on? It wobbled under her weight every time she reached for another plate. Behind her, Alyssa scrolled through a phone, Harper chewed gum loudly, and neither looked at Mira. Not really. They looked through her. Past her. Like she was furniture. And the worst part? Mira didn't look upset. She looked resigned. She looked like this wasn't new. Where was Sabrina? That question stabbed deeper than any of the rest. This was her family. Her parents. Her nieces. Her blood. And Mira, our daughter, stood there like a maid, like a burden. And she was nowhere to be found. Margot didn't notice me at first. She was too busy instructing Mira on how to stack the plates without water spots. Ronald walked past the hallway, glanced toward me, and barely acknowledged my presence with a grunt. He didn't ask why I was there. He didn't seem surprised. Just muttered, "She's not like Clarissa's girls. No manners." No manners? Mira said thank you to the cashier at the bakery. She whispered excuse me when she passed me in the hallway. She apologized when she sneezed in church. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen and took it all in, the chip tiles I had offered to replace, the peeling paint Sabrina insisted didn't need touching up, the fake fruit bowl on the table that had more presence in this house than my child. And I thought about every single payment, every check, every transfer, every missed weekend trip so I could cover their property taxes, every nod I gave Sabrina when she said, "It's just temporary until they get back on their feet." They hadn't gotten back on their feet. They built a throne on my back and put Clarissa on it. Mira was just a servant in their castle. Margot finally turned and saw me. Her expression didn't change much. A flicker of surprise, quickly masked by politeness. "Oh, Julius. We weren't expecting you," she said, smoothing the creases of her blouse like that could smooth what I had seen. I didn't respond. I walked forward, gently placed a hand on Myra's shoulder. She flinched at first, then turned her head slowly. Her eyes met mine, wide and unsure. "Daddy," she said softly, her voice a whisper. "That's enough," I said, just loud enough for Margot to hear, just calm enough to signal finality. I took the sponge from Myra's hand, set it in the sink, and picked her up. Her small arms wrapped around my neck without question, without hesitation, like she'd been waiting for me all day. I didn't raise my voice, didn't start a fight. I turned and walked toward the front door with my daughter in my arms. No explanation, no goodbye. Outside, I slid her into the back seat, buckled her in, and kissed her forehead. She smiled, a tired, relieved kind of smile. Then I pulled out my phone. I scrolled down to the number saved under Michael, loan officer, and hit call. "Michael," I said once he picked up, "cancel the payments." Effective immediately. He didn't question it. He just said, "Understood." And as I pulled away from that house, the one I paid for, the one that housed everything I hated, I realized something with crystal clarity. They weren't just unworthy of my money. They were unworthy of my child. We returned the next day. Not because I wanted to. Not because Mira needed to. But because Sabrina texted that she'd be there, and Mira asked me if she could see her mother, just for a bit. Her voice was hesitant, soft around the edges, like she was asking for too much. That's the kind of child she was becoming in that house, careful, apologetic. 6 years old and already mastering the art of shrinking herself. I drove us over after lunch, my grip tighter on the steering wheel than it should have been. Mira sat in the back, quietly humming something I couldn't place. The kind of hum a child uses to fill silence when they know their parent's heart is loud with thoughts. When we pulled up, she glanced toward the house and then back at me, reading my expression like she always did. Too perceptive. Too used to watching the adults for cues. "Daddy, do I say hi to everyone?" she asked. "You say hi to who treats you kindly," I said. She nodded, then unbuckled her seatbelt and slid out of the car like she was stepping into a role. Inside, the air smelled like citrus polish and burnt coffee. Margot sat in her usual chair by the kitchen window, legs crossed, sipping from her favorite porcelain tea set, the one with gold rims and little blue flowers she claimed were too delicate for everyday use. On the counter beside her were 3 glasses. 2 of them were tall, clear, gleaming with condensation, filled with orange juice and mint leaves, droplets trickling down like a commercial ad. The third one, shorter, rougher, held cloudy tap water and was chipped along the rim, the kind you wouldn't give a guest, the kind you keep at the back of the cabinet just in case. Margot didn't even look at me as she said, "Alyssa, Harper, come get your juice before it warms up." The twins came bounding in from the living room, all shiny hair and choreographed entitlement. They grabbed the tall glasses and flopped back on the couch with the ease of people born into approval. Mira stood still beside me, hands clasped together. Then Margot reached for the chipped cup, slid it 2 inches toward Mira without meeting her eyes, and said, "Here. You can have that one." No sweetheart, no warmth. Just that. A chipped cup. A gesture masquerading as generosity. I looked down at Mira. She didn't move. Her eyes darted toward the couch where the twins sipped their juice and laughed about something on the tablet between them. She looked back at the cup like it was a test. If she took it, she'd prove she wasn't ungrateful. If she didn't, she'd be accused of having an attitude. She reached for the cup with both hands. "Put it down, baby," I said gently. Mira froze, then obeyed. Margot raised an eyebrow, finally looking at me. "What's the problem now?" she asked, like I was interrupting a perfectly lovely moment. "The problem," I said, "is you think my daughter deserves less because she doesn't come from Clarissa." Margot scoffed. "She comes from Sabrina, doesn't she? My daughter. I've treated her no different than I did the twins at her age." "You mean like background noise?" I asked, my voice still calm, almost clinical. Ronald shuffled into the room, chewing on a toothpick like it was a cigar, muttered, "Don't start another scene, Julius. We're all tired of the dramatics." I wanted to laugh. Me, the dramatic one? I'd kept my head down for 6 years. 6 years of hosting barbecues, patching leaky pipes, covering shortfalls in their utility bills when Ronald's pension didn't stretch far enough. 6 years of biting my tongue every time they referred to Clarissa's girls as our pride and Mira as Sabrina's little one. Not even our granddaughter. Just a footnote. A reminder. A cost. Mira looked up at me again. I knelt to meet her eye level. "You don't drink from cups that hurt you, baby," I said, pointing to the crack. "You deserve better than that." She blinked, confused at first, then a quiet understanding settled in her gaze. She didn't nod. She just took my hand. And that's when I made the call. Still crouched beside my daughter. Still holding her hand. I pulled my phone from my back pocket and scrolled down until I found Michael's number. Margot's voice sharpened. You calling the police now, Julius? I hit the call button. No, I said. Not them. Michael answered on the second ring. Mr. Ward. It's time, I said. A pause, then his voice steady. Canceling the mortgage payments effective immediately? Yes. Lock it in today. You got it. I hung up. Margot stood now. Ronald stared, toothpick forgotten. The room had shifted. The walls leaned closer. The air had grown thick with the realization that something valuable had just slipped out from under them. What do you mean canceling? Ronald asked, his voice hollowed out. I said, rising to my full height. Your lifeline just hung up. Margot's lips parted like she might cry, but nothing came. Not yet. She still didn't understand. Not really. Not the magnitude. But she would. Clarissa and the girls are coming over this weekend, she said weakly, like that was relevant. They can drink out of chipped cups, I said. And they can explain to Mira why the ceiling leaks and the heat shuts off in winter. Ronald took a step forward. We took her in. We gave her a home. You gave her chores, I said. You gave her judgment and silence. You let her believe she had to earn love by being invisible. I turned to Mira. Let's go. As we walked to the door, I heard Margot say, You're doing this to punish us. No, I said without turning. I'm doing this to protect her. Outside, the sun felt different, warmer, freer. Mira squeezed my hand tighter as we reached the car. Daddy, she said as I opened the door for her. I didn't like that cup. I know, I said. You never have to drink from it again. I buckled her in, then slid into the driver's seat and started the car. As I pulled away from that house, I didn't feel regret. Not even sadness. Just the clean ache of clarity. They had built their empire on my back, and I had just walked out from underneath it. The thing about power is that most people don't realize who's actually holding it until it slips. And by then, it's already too late. Margot, Ronald, Clarissa, they strutted around that house like they were chosen, like royalty ordained by birthright and reinforced by tradition. But tradition didn't pay bills. Ego didn't cover mortgages. Pride didn't handle property taxes. I did. Quietly. For 6 years. I was the lifeline they never acknowledged. The steady hand behind their illusion of status. And now, with one decision, one call, I had pulled the cord. And they didn't even know it. Not yet. That's what made the days that followed so strange. Because everything on the surface stayed the same. Mira and I spent the rest of that weekend at my apartment. She slept in my bed, curled beside me, and asked questions like, Do people love you more if you're quiet? I didn't have answers that wouldn't also break her heart, so I told her the truth in a way she could hold. The right people love you no matter how loud or soft you are. She nodded and fell asleep mid-sentence. By Monday morning, I had a strange stillness in my chest. Not relief. Not joy. Just still. I didn't regret cutting them off, not for a second. But I knew what was coming. The collapse wouldn't be loud. No, this family was too proud for that. The collapse would be quiet. Measured. Masked as confusion. They'd ask polite questions first. Then the panic would arrive. Then the blame. That morning, Mira asked if she had to go back to Nana's house. No, I said. Not anymore. And something in her shoulders dropped like she'd been carrying stones for years. I dropped her off at school, then parked outside the bank. Michael had already drawn up the cancellation letter. I signed it, initialed every page. He looked at me with a mix of surprise and admiration. You sure about this, Julius? I was sure the moment she called my daughter useless, I said. This isn't revenge. This is correction. He nodded, slid the folder into a locked drawer, and said, Takes a lot of patience to wait for the right moment. It wasn't patience, I said. It was love. I left the bank and walked 2 blocks to the cafe where I used to meet Sabrina when we were still in love. I ordered a coffee I barely touched and just sat with the silence, with the knowing. I could imagine Margot sipping her tea that morning, unaware. I could see Ronald in the backyard tinkering with the busted generator I bought him for his birthday 2 years ago. Clarissa probably had no idea anything had changed. She hadn't contributed a cent in over a year, but still treated the place like her inheritance. And that was the funny part. It wasn't their house. It was mine. After Ronald's early retirement and Clarissa's little startup collapsed under its own inflated sense of brilliance, they had nowhere else to turn. They needed someone to take over the payments. Sabrina asked, pleaded, said it was temporary, just until things stabilized. I agreed, because I believed in family, because Mira still played with Harper and Alyssa back then, because I didn't know better yet. So I paid off the lien, transferred the deed to my name with their signatures tucked between guilt and desperation. They never read the fine print, never asked questions. They were just relieved someone else was holding the weight. And now, they were about to feel it all again. Except this time, I wasn't standing underneath them. That afternoon, I picked Mira up from school early. Took her out for ice cream. Let her pick 2 toppings. She chose gummy bears and strawberries, and made a mess of it before we even left the shop. And for the first time in weeks, she laughed without glancing over her shoulder. No Margot. No rules whispered between clenched smiles. Just joy, sticky and full and loud. Later that night, Sabrina called. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because if she didn't already know what was happening, she would soon. She was probably at work when Margot called her in a panic. Or maybe Clarissa called first, pretending it was just a banking glitch. But there were no glitches. No clerical errors. No system failures. There was just me, finally choosing silence not as surrender, but as strength. At home, Mira curled up on the couch with her blanket and asked if we could watch her favorite movie for the 3rd time that week. I said yes, not because I cared for it, but because I cared for her. Halfway through, she fell asleep in my arms, and I just sat there, the credits rolling behind her breathing, thinking about how we got here. How many chances I gave them to choose love over hierarchy. How often I let things slide for the sake of peace. But peace built on fear isn't peace. It's performance. And Mira had been performing her whole life in that house, performing obedience, performing gratitude, performing resilience. That show was over. By Wednesday, the call started. First, a missed call from an unknown number. Then a voicemail from Ronald, stiff and clipped. Think you've made a mistake here. Call me back. I didn't. Instead, I filed the copies of the loan closure paperwork and locked them in my desk drawer. That house would be flagged for foreclosure by the following week. They'd scramble. Maybe pool their money together. Maybe Clarissa would call her ex for help again. Or maybe they'd just default. Either way, it wasn't my problem anymore. I wasn't their safety net. I wasn't their invisible bank. I was Myra's father. And that meant choosing her joy over their comfort. The irony was, they had no idea how fragile their comfort really was. Because it wasn't built on legacy or legacy wealth. It was built on quiet sacrifice, mine. And now that I'd gone quiet in a different way, the walls were going to tremble. That night, as I folded laundry in the living room, Mira wandered out of bed with her blanket dragging behind her. "Daddy?" she asked, sleepy-eyed. "Did I do something wrong?" I sat down immediately, pulled her onto my lap. "No, baby." "Why would you ask that?" "Because I used the cracked cup. And Nana said I should be grateful." My chest ached. Not with anger. With grief for what she had already absorbed, for what she'd been taught to accept as normal. I looked her in the eyes. "You didn't do anything wrong, Mira." "They did." She stared at me like she was trying to believe it. Like the truth felt too big to fit inside her yet. I kissed her forehead. "We're safe now," I said. "That house isn't our home anymore." She nodded slowly, then whispered, "Okay," and rested her head on my chest. And I knew in that moment, we hadn't lost anything at all. We were just finally free enough to rebuild. The first call came on a Thursday morning. Mira was still asleep, curled in a tangle of blankets on the couch, her favorite stuffed panda tucked beneath her arm like it was guarding her dreams. I was standing at the kitchen sink, making coffee, letting the steam rise into the quiet morning like incense for a new life. The phone buzzed once. Then again. I didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was. Margot. I let it ring 4 times before I answered. I didn't want to, but some part of me knew this was the moment it all shifted. I pressed the phone to my ear and said nothing. "Julius." Her voice sounded tight, like she'd already rehearsed what she was going to say, but I let it ring 4 times before I answered. I didn't want to, but some part of me knew this was the moment it all shifted. I pressed the phone to my ear and said nothing. "Julius." Her voice sounded tight, like she'd already rehearsed what she was going to say, but didn't like how it felt coming out. I still said nothing. "The bank called this morning. They said the last mortgage payment was missed. I told them it must have been an error. That you've always been so reliable." I took a slow sip of coffee and let the silence stretch out between us like a truth she wasn't ready to face. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm. Flat. It wasn't an error. A pause. Then, "What do you mean?" I stopped paying. The silence that followed didn't stretch, it dropped. Heavy and immediate. Like something had just fallen through the floorboards of her mind, and she wasn't sure how deep it would go. "Why would you do that?" she asked, but it wasn't anger in her voice. Not yet. It was confusion wrapped in the soft fabric of entitlement. Because family doesn't scream at my daughter while her cousins laugh. Her inhale was sharp. A wounded gasp from a woman who didn't know she'd drawn blood. "That's not fair, Julius." "No," I said. "What wasn't fair was watching my daughter wash dishes while your golden granddaughters scrolled through TikTok. What wasn't fair was handing Mira a chipped cup while Alyssa and Harper drank out of glass towers like royalty. What's not fair is your silence while she's humiliated in a house she was told to call home." "You don't understand," she started, her tone shifting into something softer, calculated. "Children play rough. They tease. That's normal." She wasn't playing. She was working. For approval. For space. For air. She tried again. "We just thought. You did all that for love. For family." And that's when I realized the depth of her delusion. Not just ignorance, but a willful blindness that had made a home in her bones. "I did it for Mira," I said. "But love doesn't mean funding your fantasy while my daughter gets treated like a maid." "Julius," she said, and there was a tremor in her voice now. The first crack in her castle. "Please, we didn't know you felt this way. Let's talk." "No," I said. "Not this time." I heard her take a breath, probably to pivot, to launch into the guilt-wrapped gaslighting that had worked on me before. But I didn't wait for it. I ended the call. Hung up before she could twist the knife and call it kindness. I stood there in the kitchen with the line still warm in my hand and the sun beginning to filter through the blinds. It was quiet again. Not peaceful, but settled. Like the truth had finally landed where it needed to. I looked over at Mira, still sleeping, her face soft with safety. I had no idea what Margot would do next, who she'd call, what lie she'd spin, what narrative she'd try to salvage. But I knew one thing. I wouldn't be part of it. Later that day, I got an email from the bank. Confirmation that foreclosure proceedings had begun. I read the notice twice, not because I doubted it, but because I wanted to feel every word. Every consequence I had once shielded them from now lined up in neat paragraphs. This was the reckoning. Not a scream. Not a slap. A quiet, legal unmaking. By the afternoon, I got another call, Sabrina this time. I didn't answer. I figured if she had anything meaningful to say, she'd show up. She didn't. Instead, Mira and I went to the library. She picked out 3 books on horses, 1 on space, and a comic she wasn't quite old enough to read but liked the pictures. She clutched them to her chest like treasure. When the librarian gave her a sticker, she looked up at me and smiled like the world finally made room for her. That evening, as I cooked pasta and Mira colored at the table, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a group text. "Clarissa, I heard what you did. You're tearing this family apart. Valerie, Sabrina's aunt. I'm sure this is a phase. Julius just needs to process his feelings. Darren, the ever-neutral uncle. Maybe we should have a meeting, like adults. We can fix this before it gets worse. And Ruth, Grandma Ruth, the same woman who once told Mira to toughen up or be left behind." Her message was the shortest. "Why now?" I stared at the screen, reread it 3 times, then turned the phone face down on the counter. Mira looked up from her coloring book. "Was that work?" "No," I said. "Just people who don't know how to say sorry." She blinked, thoughtful. "You say sorry when you do something bad." Exactly. We ate dinner in quiet, the kind of quiet that healed instead of hurt. Mira told me about a classmate who brought a bunny to school. She laughed when she described how it pooped in the reading corner, and I laughed too, real and full and long. For a moment, I forgot about the house. The payments. The names on the group chat. All I saw was her, the child they tried to chip away at, blooming again in front of me. Later, as I did the dishes, she tugged at my sleeve. "Daddy, if we don't go back to Nana's house, where do the girls go?" I paused, rinsing a plate. "They stay there for now," I said. "But the house is changing. Because of us?" "Because I remembered what matters." She nodded, satisfied. Then said the thing that lodged itself in my chest and stayed there long after she went asleep. "I like it better when we don't have to pretend." I knelt, hugged her close, breathed her in. "Me too, Mira," I whispered. "Me too." And just like that, I realized. Letting the house fall wasn't destruction. It was deliverance. The next call came just before noon. I was standing in the produce aisle, comparing 2 different bags of baby carrots, Myra's new obsession, when my phone lit up with Clarissa's name. I watched it ring twice. 3 times. Then I answered, not out of curiosity, but clarity. I wanted to hear how royalty reacts when their crown starts to slip. Julius, she said immediately, voice bright and brittle like polished glass. We need to talk. I put the carrots in the basket. About what? You know what? About the house. About what you've done. There it was, no warmth, no how are you, no check on Mira. Just ownership, as if the place was hers by divine decree, and I'd vandalized the gates. I didn't do anything to the house, I said. I just stopped paying for it. A pause. Just one breath of silence. Then she launched into it. You're tearing this family apart, Julius. That house is everything to us. To my girls. They grew up there. They have memories, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, backyard picnics. I leaned on the cart. And Mira? What does she have? She's not the point. She's exactly the point. Clarissa sighed. You've always had this thing about playing the martyr. Like we've wronged you somehow. Like we've taken something from you. But you married into this family. No one begged you. No, I said slowly. But you all begged me to save that house. Quietly. Legally. And I did. And now you're destroying it. For what? Because Mira didn't get orange juice in a crystal glass. For everything before the orange juice. For every sideways comment. Every shrug. Every time you let your daughters laugh while Mira cried and told yourself they were just playing. She's dramatic, Clarissa said, dismissively. Overly sensitive. She's 6. She needs to toughen up, she said, like it was advice and not an indictment. She needs to feel safe, I said, something she never was around you. Julius, listen, Clarissa said, her tone suddenly shifting, softening. I could practically hear her flipping through a new script. Let's just press pause. Maybe it's gone too far. Maybe we all said things we didn't mean. I'm sure we can work something out. Maybe you just needed to be heard. I cut her off. You had years to hear me. And her. You chose not to. You chose ease over empathy. There was real silence now. She wasn't expecting that. She had pulled from the playbook, the one where apologies were just negotiations for status quo. But that playbook didn't work on me anymore. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, she said, quieter now. We were just trying to hold it together. You held it together on my back, I said. And Myra's. They're children. They don't understand how things work. No, I said, but they understand fairness. They understand being left out. They understand who gets poured juice and who gets told to clean up the mess. She was quiet. I imagined her pacing. In some silk robe. Maybe standing in the very kitchen she thought she still owned, looking out over the yard that no longer belonged to her father. Maybe her daughters were there, playing on the swing set I'd paid for, unaware that the future of that house was now a legal countdown. She's just a little girl, she muttered, almost to herself. Why would you do this to all of us? For her. That was the moment the last mask fell. Because in Clarissa's world, Mira wasn't us. She was adjacent. An afterthought. The girl they tolerated. The one who didn't quite match their curated photos or their filtered reality. For her. I repeated. Because she's the only part of that house that mattered. I just think, she said, voice teetering, we should have had a chance to fix it before you went nuclear. Nuclear was letting her cry alone in a guest room with no blankets because she spilled apple juice on your couch. She was loud. She woke the babies. She's not a servant. She's not family. And there it was. The truth. Raw. Undressed. Involuntary. I didn't yell. Didn't even flinch. I just said, thank you for finally saying it out loud. She tried to backtrack. I didn't mean. You did. And that's why you'll never see her again. Clarissa gasped. You can't do that. I can. And I will. You're being cruel. No. I'm finally being honest. Then I hung up. I stood there for a moment, surrounded by organic lettuce and 2-for-1 pears, letting her words settle and slip right off me. The weight of pretending was gone. The need to make peace with people who had made a war out of subtle slights was gone. I checked out. The cashier asked if I wanted a rewards card. I declined. I had nothing left to earn. When Mira got home that day, she asked if we could go to the park. I said yes. We packed carrot sticks and apple slices and her favorite juice box, the one she always hesitated to ask for when we visited Margot's. At the park, she climbed higher on the jungle gym than I'd ever seen her go. She waved from the top. Look, Daddy, she shouted. I see you, I called back. And I did. Not just her body on the bars, but her spirit, unburdened, unbent, glowing. We stayed until the sun dipped low and the sky bruised into purple. That night, she brushed her teeth without being asked, put on pajamas with stars on them, and crawled into bed humming a song I didn't recognize. As I tucked her in, she said, "Alyssa told me I'm lucky you love me." I paused, caught off guard. She said that? Yeah, but she also said I don't belong, that her mom says so. I sat down beside her. Do you believe her? No, she said without hesitation. Because belonging isn't something someone gives you. It's something you know inside. I smiled. Exactly. She looked up at me. And I belong with you. You always have. As she drifted off, I realized Clarissa had been right about one thing. This was a turning point. The crown she wore wasn't just slipping. It had shattered. And I wasn't picking up the pieces. I don't know what made me drive by that house again. Maybe curiosity. Maybe closure. Maybe I wanted to see the moment their illusion started to crack. The sun had barely burned through the morning haze, and Mira was still at school, humming something about Jupiter during breakfast. I had the day off. I could have done anything. Slept in, cleaned the car, caught up on work. But instead, I turned down that familiar cul-de-sac, the street that used to feel like obligation but now only stirred detachment. I parked 2 houses down and watched from the safety of tinted windows. The lawn hadn't been mowed. Ronald usually did it himself with the same rusty mower I bought him 5 birthdays ago. It sat in the open garage now, unmoved. The hedges were curling into themselves. And taped to the door, crooked but official, was the notice. Foreclosure proceedings initiated. Final payment delinquent. Vacate pending. It wasn't just a letter. It was a reckoning. I stared at it like it was a framed piece of art. Something I had painted with every unspoken word, every swallowed protest, every deposit they never acknowledged. And now it was nailed to their front door like scripture. They had ruled this house like a manor, crowned themselves keepers of legacy, queens of tradition, men of outdated pride. But the deed didn't care about bloodlines. It cared about signatures. It cared about responsibility. And they had neither. I watched a neighbor pause while walking her dog. She squinted at the paper, then tilted her head in confusion. I imagined what she was thinking. Hadn't this family always projected stability? The garden parties, the holiday wreaths, the matching outfits in front of the fireplace. What had gone wrong? Then the door opened, and Margot appeared. Still in a robe. Hair done. Lipstick painted on like armor. She yanked the notice off the door and crumpled it in one hand. But the movement wasn't fast. It was careful, controlled, as if even in panic she couldn't risk looking ungraceful. She spotted the neighbor and forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. They exchanged waves. Then she stepped back inside and closed the door slowly, quietly, like she could still shut the truth out. I didn't stay long. Just long enough to see the shift the moment the queen realized her castle was rented. Back at home, the group chat was alive. It started with Uncle Darren, of course. Darren, "Hey everyone, we need to stay calm. Let's talk like adults." And Valerie, "This is madness. Julius is acting out of bitterness. This isn't him. Clarissa, we've been humiliated. My daughters are traumatized. Do you even care, Julius?" I didn't respond. Grandma Ruth, who hadn't said much since her infamous 2-word text, finally wrote a paragraph. "Why now, Julius? Why embarrass the family? We all have flaws, but this is vindictive. Vindictive. Not protective. Not corrective. Vindictive." Still, none of them mentioned Mira. Not one message. Not one question about the child they allowed to be treated like the help. No concern over her well-being. No apology for the chipped cups or cold guest rooms or shouted orders. Just damage control. Just shame. I closed the group chat and opened my camera roll instead. Flipped through photos of Mira dancing in socks across our small wooden floor, face covered in flour from the last batch of cookies we made. Her grinning with a popsicle on our balcony. Her coloring the sun with 5 different crayons because one shade isn't enough. She was okay. Better than okay. She was free. And they hated it. Not because she was hurt, but because she wasn't anymore. Because the power they had didn't reach her anymore. Because I had finally, fully removed her from their reach. By evening, Sabrina called again. This time, I answered. "I saw the notice," she said, skipping past pretense. "I figured you had. You're really doing this?" "I already did." She was quiet for a beat. "Then, you're punishing them for not being who you wanted them to be. I'm protecting Mira from who they are. Clarissa's girls are upset. They don't understand. Mira understands. She's 6, and she understands exactly what it means to be othered in a house that was supposed to be hers too. She misses her cousins. She misses kindness. There's a difference. Sabrina sighed. Do you know what this makes you look like? I don't care. They're saying you're unstable. That this was about ego. That you were never really part of the family. They finally got that part right. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I didn't even raise my voice. I just laid the truth down like a clean sheet over a stained mattress. You chose silence every time they humiliated her. You nodded along, shrugged it off. You wanted peace, but not justice. I wanted both. And now, I'll settle for distance. She didn't respond. Not right away. You're going to raise her without us? No. I'm going to raise her without harm. The door's open to anyone who brings love. Not legacy. Not entitlement. Just love. She hung up. Not angrily. Not abruptly. Just quietly. That night, Mira asked why the group hadn't called her. Because they're busy figuring things out, I said. Did I do something bad again? No, baby. They just don't know how to say sorry yet. She thought about that for a long time. Then she whispered, You're not mad at me? I wrapped my arms around her, pulled her close. You did nothing wrong. I'm proud of you. Every day. She nodded, eyes wide and serious. I don't want to go back there. You never have to. Outside, the wind blew faintly, tugging at the edges of the world. But inside our small home, nothing trembled. Nothing cracked. No notices taped to her door. Just warmth. Just breath. Just truth. The house I saved them with is slipping through their fingers. And for the first time in a long time, I feel nothing but peace. The bungalow wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, a narrow hallway, 1 bathroom with a faucet that clicked when you turned it off too fast. But it was mine. Quietly purchased last year when the first crack showed in my marriage to Sabrina, when Mira started flinching every time someone raised their voice. It had stayed empty all this time, just a backup plan gathering dust and sunlight. Now it was a home. I carried Mira over the threshold like a tradition reborn. She clung to my shoulders, unsure, I scanning the unfamiliar walls as if searching for hidden judgment. But the silence here wasn't loaded. It didn't whisper criticisms from behind doors or trail passive sighs down the hallway. It just sat still and waited for her to decide it was safe. I set her down gently. She walked through the room slowly, dragging her fingers along the wall like she was tracing boundaries she could finally redraw. I followed her to the back bedroom, the smaller one. The one I had painted pale yellow, just in case. She stopped in the center, looked around, and then smiled. Is this my room? If you want it. She dropped her backpack and spun once in the middle of the rug, arms out like wings. It smells like cookies. It probably smells like paint and carpet glue, I said, laughing. She shrugged. Still smells like cookies to me. That night, we ate peanut butter sandwiches on the floor. No table yet, no chairs. Just cushions and soft conversation. She told me about her new teacher, Mr. Lionel, who wore colorful socks and told stories about his cat named Nebula. She laughed when she spoke about him. A real laugh, not the kind she used to force at her cousin's house, the one that came with quick glances to see who was watching. I cleaned up after dinner, humming to myself. From the living room, she called out, Can I play music? I paused, the question so simple and yet so telling. Of course. She found my old Bluetooth speaker in one of the boxes and pee. At bedtime, she asked if I could stay with her until she fell asleep. I laid beside her on the narrow twin mattress, both of us staring at the ceiling. Do you miss the big house? She asked. No, I said. Not even a little? I turned my head toward her. Do you? She thought for a moment, then shook her head. It was too loud. Too many people? No, she said, too many rules. Even when no one was talking. I kissed the top of her head. This house has only one rule. What is it? You're allowed to be happy here. She smiled and closed her eyes. When she fell asleep, I sat in the kitchen and cried. Not loudly. Not broken. Just quiet tears. Grief, maybe, for the years we lost. For the time she spent shrinking herself into a shape that pleased people who never deserved her. But there was something else in those tears too, relief. The kind that sits at the bottom of your chest and expands slowly, like warm water. The next morning, she made the toast. Burned it, but didn't panic. She laughed, scraped the char with a butter knife, and called it extra crispy. I told her she'd make a great chef one day. That weekend, we visited a small thrift store and picked out decorations for her room, string lights, a cloud-shaped night lamp, and a second-hand beanbag in sky blue. She found a framed picture of a dancing giraffe and insisted it belonged on her wall. Why a giraffe? Because they have long necks but still look gentle. It made no sense. It made perfect sense. On Sunday, we baked cookies. Flour in our hair, the timer beeping too soon, one batch undercooked, the other slightly overdone. Mira didn't care. She danced around the kitchen with chocolate smudges on her cheeks and said, "Dad, this place doesn't feel like walking on eggshells." I stopped mid-step, heart catching on her words. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" She looked up at me, eyes clear, voice soft. "It doesn't feel like if I say the wrong thing, I'll get the look." "What look?" "The one where people smile with their mouths, but not their eyes." I bent down, held her cheeks between my hands. "You never have to worry about that here. Even if I burn the toast, especially if you burn the toast." She giggled and hugged me, so tight it cracked something open inside me that I hadn't even realized was still sealed. We didn't have a big house anymore. No polished stairs, no manicured lawn. Just 2 bedrooms, a half-stock pantry, and walls covered in drawings and stickers and fingerprints. But every inch of it breathed like a home. A real one. One Mira didn't have to earn her place in. She asked if we could make house rules later that night. We wrote them on a piece of construction paper and taped it to the fridge. House rules. 1. Dance if the music is good. 2. Cry if you need to. 3. Laugh even if no one else does. 4. Say what you mean. 5. Burn the toast. That last one was hers. We read them aloud every night that week. When Sabrina texted asking for a calm conversation, I didn't respond. When Clarissa sent a long message detailing how the girls are confused and scared, I deleted it. None of them asked how Mira was. Not once. And I wasn't about to waste breath explaining her joy to people who once mistook her silence for obedience. That Friday, Mira brought home a drawing from school. It was a picture of a house. Not the big one. Not the one with columns and granite countertops. Just a small yellow house with a crooked roof and a door that stood wide open. In front of it was a girl with pigtails holding hands with a man in a blue shirt. Above them was a single word written in bold purple crayon. Home. She handed it to me shyly. "For your room," she said. I framed it that evening. And in that moment, I understood something deeper than all the legal filings and quiet revenge and righteous distance I had drawn between us and them. I hadn't just bought a house. I had reclaimed a daughter. I didn't go. I could have. I could have stood at the back of the room in a clean blazer and watched the whole thing unfold like a man watching a controlled demolition. But I'd already seen enough of that house to last a lifetime. So I stayed home. I dropped Mira off at school, took the long way back through town, bought myself a coffee I didn't need, and sat in the park across from the courthouse. The breeze was light, cool on my face. I checked the time. 10:58 a.m. 2 minutes before the auction was scheduled to begin. I imagined the room, fluorescent lights, cheap carpet, rows of plastic chairs. A court official at the front, reading from a script. Margot sitting somewhere near the aisle, clutching a folder of meaningless documents. Ronald beside her, red-faced and silent, trying not to look like the walls were closing in. And Clarissa, of course. Clarissa would have shown up late but loud, probably in heels that clicked like punctuation on a threat. They wouldn't understand how this could happen. Not really. Even though I told them. Even though I warned them. Because people like that never believe the bottom will drop until it's already gone, and even then, they blame the floor for being weak. The buyer was a man named Mr. Howlett. I'd looked him up a week prior, not out of concern, just curiosity. A real estate developer. Middle-aged. Pragmatic. Not the kind of man who cared about legacy or memories or birthday candles once lit in living rooms. He only saw square footage, market value, potential flips. To him, the house was a structure for walls and a roof, soon to be gutted and dressed in quartz and trendy tile for someone else's new beginning. And that, somehow, felt like justice. I stared at the cup of coffee in my hands and thought about Mira. How she used to sit on the porch of that house with her legs pulled into her chest, watching the other girls play, waiting for someone to call her in. How many times she'd heard, "Not now," or "You already had your turn," or "Go help Nana." I used to think she'd forget that. I wanted her to forget. But kids don't forget what makes them feel small. They carry it. They bury it. They build around it. But now she was rebuilding with light. I checked my phone again. 11:12 a.m. It was done. By the time they walked out of that auction room, the house was no longer theirs, not even in name. The walls they worshipped were someone else's to repaint. The kitchen Margot once ruled with a porcelain fist would be stripped and renovated. The living room that echoed with Clarissa's curated photo shoots and Ronald's heavy silences would be emptied, stage by stage, memory by memory, until it held no trace of their kingdom. And me? I'd never felt freer. I picked up Mira from school that afternoon, and she ran to me like she always did now. Full speed, no hesitance, no scanning the parking lot for someone more important. She held a cardboard crown she'd made in art class. Glittered, crooked, beautiful. For you, she said. I crouched. For me. Yep. You get a crown now. What did I do to earn it? You saved the castle, she said simply, then skipped ahead to the car, humming to herself. And I nearly lost it right there in the pickup lane. At home, I made us grilled cheese sandwiches while she danced around the kitchen. Halfway through dinner, my phone buzzed again. I almost didn't check it, but something told me to look. It was a voicemail from Clarissa. I hit play and leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Her voice trembled, not with sadness, with rage laced in disbelief. You really did it. You let that place go. Just like that. Sold to some contractor who doesn't even know what that house meant to us. You destroyed everything. My girls are crying. Margot hasn't spoken all day. Ronald's blood pressure spiked. You've torn this family in half, and for what? Your ego? Because we didn't bow low enough to you? You're not a hero, Julius. You're a wrecking ball. I deleted the message before it ended. Because Mira had just walked in with a tray of cookies she pretended to bake. Because the crown she'd made sat on my head like a secret joke between us. Because I didn't need to listen to people who had confused cruelty for tradition and silence for respect. Clarissa wasn't wrong, though. I had torn something down, but it wasn't a family. It was a myth. That night, as Mira brushed her teeth, she asked me what happens to the house now. Someone else will live there, I said. Will they be nice? I hope so. Will they fix it? Maybe. Or maybe they'll knock it down and build something new. She rinsed her mouth, thoughtful. Sometimes starting over is better. I kissed her forehead. You're smarter than me. I know, she said with a grin, then ran off to bed. After she fell asleep, I sat on the couch in the dark. Not out of sadness. Just reflection. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Aunt Valerie. Please think about the children. They don't understand what's happening. You could have handled this quietly. But I had handled it quietly. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't made speeches or sought revenge. I'd made a decision. Then another. Then another. A series of deliberate choices, not to hurt, but to heal. They just couldn't tell the difference. So I turned the phone off. And I sat there in the stillness of a home that smelled like melted cheese and lavender hand soap. A home where no one flinched at the sound of footsteps. A home with glitter on the rug and a crooked giraffe painting on the wall. The auction had come and gone. The house was no longer mine. But Mira? Mira was. And no one would ever put a notice on her worth again. They didn't take long to start spinning their version of the story. I saw it happen in real time. Like watching storm clouds roll in over a town that still believed the sun was out. It started with a single message from Margot, sent on a Sunday morning while Mira and I were assembling a flat-pack bookshelf in her room. She'd picked the purple one. I handled the screws, and she handled the stickers. We were halfway through when my phone buzzed. Margot, you humiliated us. You destroyed your own child's legacy. Legacy. That word sat on the screen like a rotting fruit, sour and hollow. I didn't respond. I didn't even let Mira see it. I just locked my phone, tucked it in the drawer, and handed her another butterfly sticker. But the message clung to the day like a wet shirt. Destroyed her legacy? What legacy? The chipped cups? The cold guest room? The whispered comparisons to Clarissa's twins? That wasn't a legacy. That was generational rot dressed up in lace and plastic praise. Later that evening, I found out Clarissa had gone further. She'd called 2 of the neighbors. People I hadn't spoken to in months, and told them I was unstable. That I'd been erratic since the divorce. That I'd always resented their family's closeness and used Mira as leverage to get back at them. I heard this from Mr. Arnold, who lived across from the old house and used to wave at me while mowing his lawn. He called me to ask if I was okay, said Clarissa had shown up at his wife's book club, and cried a little, while explaining how hard this had all been on her daughters. They just don't understand, she'd said. They keep asking why Uncle Julius hates us now. They never mentioned Mira. Not once. Not her name. Not her feelings. Not what she'd been through. They centered themselves in the narrative like they always had, surrounded by imaginary violins and the applause of people too distant to see the truth. Clarissa's words spread fast. Shared at PDA meetings, whispered in grocery store aisles, repeated by people who'd never sat with Mira during one of her nightmares, who never watched her hands tremble while folding napkins for Margot's dinner parties. She told them I was bitter, that I wanted control, that I couldn't handle being excluded. It was fascinating, really, how quickly they rewrote history, how neatly they snipped out their own cruelty and glued in my supposed instability like it was a footnote in someone else's collapse. And when that didn't catch, they tried guilt. Sabrina texted late one night. Sabrina, Clarissa says you blocked her. The girls are confused. They still miss Mira. Can't you be the bigger person? I stared at the words, the audacity of them. Be the bigger person? I had been. For years. I had swallowed their condescension, their subtle digs, their performative kindness that always came with a side of silence. I had funded their comfort while my daughter learned how to disappear in plain sight. Now, I was done being big. I was being clear. That weekend, Mira and I visited the city park she used to love but hadn't been to in almost a year. As she ran ahead toward the carousel, I sat on a bench and checked my voicemail. There was another message from Aunt Valerie. Julius, honey, I know things have been tense, but we're family. These things happen. Everyone's heartbroken. Maybe we said things we didn't mean. Maybe you did too. But it's time to rebuild. For the children. I almost laughed. The children? Mira hadn't received a single message. No card. No call. No check-in. No apology. And yet they had the gall to say this was about the children. I deleted the voicemail, then opened my camera. Mira was mid-laugh, spinning in circles, arms out, wind in her hair. I took a picture, froze that joy in pixels, proof that her story didn't end where they hoped it would. Back home, I found an envelope wedged in the doorframe. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. Margot. Inside was a letter, written in cursive with deliberate loops and carefully chosen words. She called the foreclosure rash, said she had always tried to teach discipline, and expected you to see past the noise of childish misunderstandings. She wrote, "What will Mira think of you in 10 years when she realizes you destroyed the home her mother was raised in?" I didn't finish the letter. I set it on fire in the sink, watched it curl into ash and smoke. That's the thing about people like them. They think controlling the narrative is the same as being right. They think silence is forgiveness and proximity is love. They rewrite history with soft hands and hard hearts. But Mira remembers. She remembers every time she was told to clean up after a party she wasn't allowed to attend. She remembers being left out of family photos. She remembers the sting of comparison, the way Clarissa's girls always got the first pick, the best chair, the last word. She remembers crying once during a game and hearing Margot whisper, "She's too soft." They've rewritten the story to make me the villain. I'll wear that costume if it keeps my daughter safe. That night, as we made popcorn on the stove, Mira asked if we could have a movie night. I said yes. She picked a film where the little girl defeats a dragon with kindness and cleverness. Halfway through, she turned to me and said, "I'm glad we don't live in that big house anymore. It had too many shadows." I looked at her. "Yeah, sweetheart. It did." She leaned against my shoulder. "Do they miss us?" I thought about Margot's letter, Clarissa's lies, the voicemails full of everything but apology. "They missed the version of us that stayed quiet," I said. "Not who we really are." She nodded. "I like us better now." "Me too. Because this wasn't revenge. This was revision." And the story we're writing now? It has no room for cracked cups or half-truths. Just a girl who dances in the kitchen like it's her stage. And a father who finally sees her for who she is. It wasn't a grand party. No towering cake. No hired entertainers. No glossy invitations with ribbons. Just 10 people. 10 carefully chosen people. Myra's birthday fell on a Saturday that year, and for the first time, she planned it like a girl who believed she mattered. She wanted balloons, not pink, but teal. She asked for a chocolate chip cookie cake instead of the usual store-bought sponge her cousins always brought. And she invited her people who had seen her, heard her, held her heart gently. Her favorite teacher, Mr. Lionel, came early, carrying a book about galaxies and a paper crown he'd made from construction paper. He told her she was a constellation. Nina, our neighbor with the silver braid and patient hands, brought a tray of lemon cookies and hugged Mira like she was a niece. Jordan, my coworker, showed up in a hoodie covered in cartoon characters, much to Myra's delight, and helped set up the folding chairs out back. There were no polished speeches, no gift bags designed to impress, just laughter and clumsy dancing, and the sound of children being children, free, loud, joyful. Mira twirled through the yard with a streamer in one hand and frosting on her cheek. She didn't ask for permission to laugh. She didn't glance over her shoulder to see if someone was judging her. At one point, she tugged on my sleeve and whispered, "This feels like the sky peeled open just for me." And I believed her. We grilled hot dogs and handed out paper plates and let the juice spill without panic. When the wind knocked over a cup, Mira giggled and said, "No big deal," and kept moving. That moment, that reflex to forgive the mess, felt like victory. Not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. It was normal. Finally, Sabrina didn't call. Clarissa didn't text. No one from that house sent a card or gift or message. And I didn't miss it. Neither did Mira. The absence didn't feel like loss. It felt like clarity. Like we'd finally carved out a life that didn't require apology. After everyone left, we sat in the backyard surrounded by wrapping paper and melted icing. Mira held her new sketchbook in her lap, flipping through the blank pages like they were magic. She leaned her head against my arm. "Do you think they're mad?" she asked. I didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Probably," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Good." I turned to her, surprised. She shrugged. "Because if they're mad, it means they know what they did." I looked at her, really looked at her. 6 years old, and already understanding something many adults never do, that sometimes anger from others is just confirmation that you've finally chosen yourself. "You're right," I said. She grinned. "I know." That night, I tucked her in beneath the blanket Nina crocheted for her and sat beside her bed a little longer than usual. She stared at the ceiling, fingers laced across her chest. "Daddy?" "Yeah, baby. I'm glad we left. I'm glad it's just us." I felt the words settle deep, like roots finally finding water. No fanfare. Just truth. Me too. Because it wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about teaching anyone a lesson or forcing them to change. They wouldn't. They couldn't. They'd keep spinning their story, telling people I overreacted, that I was too sensitive, too prideful, too distant. But their words didn't reach us anymore. We were on different soil now. I walked back to the kitchen, where the last of the balloons sagged against the ceiling. I cleaned quietly, every plate and crumb a reminder that something new had taken root, something unpolished and unplanned, but finally real. And as I wiped the counter, I realized what this all came down to. I didn't just cancel payments. I ended a pattern. I stopped the slow bleed of small cruelties disguised as order. I stopped the inheritance of silence, of tolerating disrespect because it came in the form of family dinners and empty smiles. I chose Mira, fully, fiercely, without compromise. And she, brave, silly, tender Mira, had bloomed in that choice. That was the best revenge. Not a foreclosure. Not a sold house. Not the voicemails and group chats and rewritten histories. The best revenge was a little girl who danced barefoot in her own backyard,